Alrighty, just having a bit of breakfast here. Clean a few things up in this joint because I've got to be out of here in a few more days. Yeah, watching a bit of stuff the other night on Aborigines getting hold of camels and stuff like that. Quite interesting. There's a whole story I'll tell you about the quote-unquote Afghans, who in fact weren't even from Afghanistan, who were camel driving people who done all the outback transport before the days of a particular train being set up, train line being put in. Anyway, they'd go around and get wild camels and basically domesticate them or break them in for usage. And it sort of followed these group of Aboriginal men as they went and done that. Couldn't seem to find any, except one or two. But yeah, they showed everything, how to put a ring in its nose and the whole 9 yards. But this thing was made, holy smoke, it was talking that there's 3 to 4 years drought in the outback. Now usually they only have 4 to 6 inches rain. I mean, this is the frickin' desert, mind you. And they didn't have any for about 3 or 4 years, and the drought's finally broken in 1967, and blah blah blah, the recent rains, da da da. And this may have well been made in about 1968. Judging by the quality of the equipment they were using, I think it might well be back then, because man oh man, she was I'll put it like this, it was in colour. That's about all it had going for it. She wasn't too bad, but oh man, you know, she's taken on a fairly old bit of equipment, we'll put it like that. The old, you know, narrator's like, so you sort of knew it was sort of fairly old style. Probably the same guy that was making informational films for World War II soldiers or something. You know, anyway, intriguing some of the things they do when they get up to. There's a word they got from the Afghans, oosh, and it sort of almost, you know, commands the camel to sit. And they try that even on wild ones, and I'm not saying it necessarily works, but, you know, sort of seems that it can. And they got what they call smoking the camel. I'd never seen this before. They basically sit the camel down, tie him up, you know, rope round his neck or whatever to a tree or whatever. And then they get a nearby bush and they work out the direction the wind's blowing in, and they get a nearby bush and they light the bloody thing up. And it sort of just sits there, you know, burning and smoking, and all the smoke wafts over the camel. And they call it smoking the camel, and it calms the camel down. So this is a wild camel that they've recently, you know, got a rope around its neck and tied it to a tree, and it, you know, they've been very testy about how they do it, and sometimes, you know, they get quite a few ropes on the damn thing. Sit him down, or try to sit him down, and then, you know, once he's sat down, they light this fire, and it, flaming hell. The amount of smoke in the air is ridiculous from one little bush. I don't know if they're, you know, if they're putting a bit of water on it to make it steam up more, or what's going on. I don't think they did though. I just think it was normal sort of spinifex burning, or a bit of mulga burning, or something like that. And you know, the old camel's calming down and they're trying to pat its back and stuff like that, but they, instead of come right up to it and, you know, possibly have the thing go freaking headbutt them or something like that, they're sitting there with a stick and they're patting it with a long stick. And when they reckon it's calm enough, you know what they do? Walk a female camel past to see if there's any interest. Now, if there's any interest, then, you know, he sort of takes an interest in her and then bonds with the rest of the group of domesticated camel and sort of becomes domesticated himself. But the real test of why they use a female one is to, you know, see how lively he is in his response to her. Well, this particular camel they showed, he was a bit over-smoked, and she walked right past him within 2 or 3 foot, and he sort of almost, didn't even realise she was there. So he sort of barely didn't even, raise his head or look at her or, anything like that. He just sort of sat there like he was, stoned as hell. There's no drug or anything in this stuff. It's just that it's, just normal smoke tends to calm a camel down, and they get so calm that they're just about blooming, not even thinking very clearly. So he was a bit too calm, so put the fire out and wait till he comes back a bit more to his senses. And quite intriguing, you sort of see aspects of white man intervention because they made a settlement there and we're here to provide the things the Aboriginals want and need, being education and health care and rightio, but also European clothes and tinned food. Oh, tinned food, rightio. And it mentioned one statement in there that really hit home with me. It goes back to the old adage of idle time is the devil's plaything. And I think it really is the case, because they said, that they've got stuff to do, everything's all right and whatnot when they're out, rounding up camels, or whatever else stuff, and there's guys there who are professional stockmen who do round up cows and stuff like that, and when they're not playing around with camels, and it basically when they get back to the settlement, there's always the question of what to do with their time and excessive time. Now, even more recently, they've had some government programs where they've had them working, and it's usually only mucking around with roads or stuff like that. Just sort of, work that you make them work to help themselves a little bit or to help the community a little bit. And, those sort of programs give them a bit of work to do. And even recently, they've had some of those, and then they've, cancelled them, or they've run out of realistic stuff to do. And, then next thing, all the bullshit starts. They sort of... all the drunken fights and all the other bullshit start, and some people, domestic violence stems from that. And this one thing I saw taken, only, probably a couple of weeks ago, they asked the kid what he wants to do. Well, I want to, grow up and do something to help the alcohol problem. And this kid's like 8 years old, and he gave him an in-depth explanation of the alcohol problem, through his eyes, in the words of an 8-year-old. But he said, people get drunk, they have fights when they get drunk, and the next day, the blooming same people that were fighting yesterday, they start the fight again, and it just carries on. And they've had a lot of problems with youth suicide out there as well. You know, and I'm not saying this was filmed, you know, just a few weeks ago. It was actually on YouTube. I saw this one, but you know, it was within the last 2 years or something like that. And you know, it really hit home that on the settlement that they had back in the 1968 or whatever, you know, they had nothing to do, and you know, nothing to do with their time when they come back from rounding up camels and domesticating and selling a handful of camels, and which aren't native to the country, by the way. Popular misconception that, you know, oh, Australia was having a camel cull a few years ago. Oh, how dare they kill the beautiful little camels that look like they're some sort of wild native frickin' animal. They're a pest animal. Long story short, they needed them to set up Darwin and set up the railway line that went from, you know, Adelaide to Darwin, and you know, bring stuff out to mines that were out in the desert. And when the truck and the train took over, well, they were worthless. So they couldn't kill them, so they just let them all go. And they become a feral pest. Anyway, I just sort of saw that bit and I thought, holy smoke, this is 1968 when things were still calm. Now, they had the same idle time with nothing to do, with alcohol added to it, and it continued to the exact same problem we got today. Too much idle time, too much alcohol, and there's troubles. The only thing they didn't have there in this film made in 1968 was a large amount of alcohol. But that came in due course, and some areas they even homebrew their own stuff, and everything went downhill from there. And that's, you know, really the pinnacle of a lot of it. I will also say that, in essence, like, they also grow in a veggie garden there, and it's quite a decent sized veggie garden. It was something that I think the government had sort of, you know, told them, well, this is what we're going to do. Well, and they did, and they actually employed people to look after the veggie garden, so that they would have, you know, food that was fresh food, versus bringing out all this tinned shit, which is most likely that god-awful corned beef they put in tins, and it tastes absolutely nothing like real frickin' meat. So far from real meat, it's ridiculous. But you know, they showed them there with a bit of corn and a bit of other stuff, a few other veggies, and there's a fair amount of it actually. There might have been, it wasn't huge, but you know, there would have been an eighth of an acre or something like that. You know, there was a decent amount. But they said, well, this only gives a little bit of work some of the time to a few people, and that's about it. And that's the thing. We come in, everything's cultivated, everything's automated, everything's pre-done, and everything's efficient. And this efficiency gives you free time, which allows you to go to work and make more money and have a higher standard of living and buy all the fandangles and bits and pieces that you felt like having but never probably even needed, or, you know, have money to invest or save for retirement or whatever. But with these people, you know, they had so little, they want so little, and really speaking, they just needed something to do. Now, I'm not saying they should hammer out a 40-hour week, because that also doesn't suit them. But they need to have something to do anyway. It doesn't have to be a set job or this or that, but they need a few hours of the day that they've got to have, you know, something that has to be done. And being a hunter-gatherer culture, they already had that. They needed something that had to be done. They had to go find some food. And whether it meant going out there for a few hours to, you know, spear a kangaroo or go looking for, there's not a great deal of different things out there, but, some areas have got native limes. Up in the north, they've got yams, and they dig them up. But they go out there in an attempt to, actually do stuff, because they've got to eat. And this is the thing, because they're hunter-gatherer, that means there's something on the agenda to do all the time, and that is more food. The reason why they don't cultivate is because of religious beliefs, more or less animism, and this has got a that, and there's a spirit of the valley and the spirit of every other blasted thing. So you don't want to mess with anything because you'll make the spirits angry, and this is why they don't make any dramatic changes, which is also why white man turned up and declared terra nullius, which basically meant that there's nothing here. And the phrase was that, we've declared terra nullius because the Aboriginals, quote unquote, aren't doing anything with the country. But you see, this is the thing. We saw it as they aren't doing anything. They saw it as, well, we want to keep in line with the spirits and this and that, so we can't mess with nature too much. We can't go building any big fandangle, this and that, or ripping out stuff and moving heaps of rocks because the spirit of the valley will be pissed off, or this one or that one, And you'd be surprised, they actually still believe this stuff today, particularly older women. And most likely the older men. I've seen a show on TV, literally taken from last year, and one of the young guys was there with a bunch of old girls in a 70 with all the great aunt and the grandma and all that business. And this guy's probably a few years younger than me. He's probably like 30 years old or something. And he found some boomerangs and bits and pieces, and he went to bring them up and show them to the camera, and the old ladies went berserk. No, put them back, no. Oh, but we've got to show this for the show, so they can see it on the show. No, don't touch it, no. Oh, okay. Well, make sure you put it back later. And they then explained to him, because the blah blah will get you. And long story short, they said that you got to put that back before the sun goes down, or later, or whatever, or within the next few hours or something. Can't really exactly remember, but definitely before they were to leave the area, because these old ladies grew up on that station. But then, at a later point, they sort of got moved on to, and they worked for the owner of that station. The station got sold or reabsorbed as government property or something, and they sort of moved them into an outback town. But they like to go back to the exact areas where they, grew up and stuff like that. And long and short of it was that they told him a story as to, why you can't touch this stuff. And what it is, there's a man who has no face, who creeps around in the middle of the night, and if you mess with artefacts or modify things or move them around, this old man with no face will come and kill you. And he is true, because, my friend's sister saw him, and then someone else saw him, and, they didn't see him recently. It was like, 25 years ago, she saw him once, and then someone else reckons they saw him, certain amount of years after that, blah, 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 It was probably just the drunk neighbour wandering around or something like that, but they fully believe that this, man with no face, and I think he apparently is supposed to make a hissing noise or something as well, he's going to come and kill you in the night if you move things around and don't, you're supposed to leave these things where they are. So there's a real thing about leaving things where they are. They also showed a guy who, I'm not too certain that I haven't read about this guy in a book, because I remember the flipping name too, but there were, there's probably a lot of big people in the outback, but long story short, there's a guy called McNamara, Now, when they're rounding these camels up, they end up, going into a station that was originally his station. Now, what you got to realise is these stations are leasehold. They're government properties that are leased by individuals, often for 100 years or 50 years or something like that. Usually it's a 99-year lease. So the long and short of it is that they've got a thing about dead people, and you're not supposed to, when someone's gone, they're gone, and you don't talk about them, you don't deal with them or anything like that. And this guy was there, he gave up on the property and he left, but he'd since died. Now they turned up and set up a blooming bit of tarp over the top of a tree branch, and that was their tent. And honestly, they're within 50 yards of the house. No, not staying in the house. Why? Well, because he's gone now, and then we later heard, on the grapevine that he died after he moved out of the outback. And some of the old guys that actually learnt how to round up cattle when they worked for this guy, because they used to be his, they were like the 17-year-olds that were being taught by him when he was there with the station, with the giant cattle ranch. And even though they've known the guy or whatever, he's dead, and that was his house, so we'd just leave that out, and really speaking, they don't like to discuss the dead. And I didn't realise it, but they also don't like to associate with stuff that was owned by the dead. It's a real touchy point. Now, there's another cultural backfire that I've seen where some of these explorers went out and went trying to look for something, and the long and short of it is that they went into country where the white man pretty much hadn't gone. But as they were going in there, the brother of this guy, who was coming back to find him a year or two later, I think it was the year after, he went missing. That they know they'd gone on a trek, but they were worried they'd buggered up their navigation and got lost, and they hadn't come back. And essentially they had died. But as they're going into this area, they started noticing certain things, like a blanket or a bit of cloth, or, one was pots and stuff that they'd taken out there with them, and they'd see the Aboriginal women with them. And they were like, hang on a minute, no Aboriginal woman's got hold of a blooming cooking pot out here. These people were, full-blown, still in tribal mode, and they had this stuff, so they said, well, we're on the right track here. So they asked some people, one guy, they saw him with a bit of cloth around his shoulders or something like this, or a bit of half of a blanket or something. Where'd you get this from? Oh, I got it from the women and kids. Where'd they get that from? Oh, well, I don't know, we'll have to ask them. And after a bit of pushing, well, they got it from a dead white man. And long and short is they wanted these Aboriginals to show them where the dead white man was. And they didn't, they keep asking them over and over and over, but they were very reluctant to talk about it. Why? Well, because they don't like to talk about dead people or think about dead people, and that's, that he existed, but that's in the past, and we just leave that alone now. And the brother of this guy took it as a sign of guilt that they'd actually murdered his brother, who had gone out on this, on this mission to find this and that or whatever, he's like an explorer sort of thing. And he thought that the Aboriginals who he was asking about where they found the dead white man, they didn't want to talk about it So because they're so paranoid about talking about it, that must mean that they're feeling guilt and that they have killed him. And it's a sign that they're guilty of killing him because they don't want to talk about him. But it wasn't that at all. It was just that once someone's dead, you don't mention them and you don't, and you just sort of leave that alone. In fact, there's a bit of a backfire in all of this too. They would name a person after a plant, and then because you weren't supposed to say the person's name, it got a little bit hard sometimes to talk about that plant. And I'm not 100% sure that what I'm going to tell you here is correct, but I've got a feeling that they may have actually renamed the plant to make it easier. Now, I can't really guarantee that that's the case, because I'm not too sure where my sources come from for that. But, it's one of these things. They just don't like talking about the dead. And the other thing you'll see over here, and I've got to capture this one day on TV because I do see it quite a bit, is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders warn that the following program may contain images or video of deceased persons. Comes up all the time, especially if you watch anything that, even not on the National Indigenous TV channel, even other things that have anything to do with it, boom, blah, blah, would like to advise that the following program, would like to advise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers that the following program contains images and sounds of deceased people, or, some shit like that, or footage of deceased people. And they just sort of always put it on blanket anyway, even if it's a show about kids and there's only kids running around, it's just like, right, bang. They just put it on the front of every Aboriginal related program. And sort of intriguing the way it's just one of these cultural differences, It's very interesting. He went out there, he's a bit worried, my daughters are showing a bit too much interest in the local boys. And he's got like 3 daughters or something, or the daughter and 2 of her friends or something like that. I think it was just a daughter and 2 of her friends. And rightio, we're going to take you out on the camel trek to keep you away from the boys for a little bit. We're going to teach you some things. So they had an area where there's, what's his name? Rabbits. And they said myxomatosis come through and knocked out a lot of them. This area was absolutely drowned in rabbits. There's a lot of the country has been at different times. And then myxomatosis come through, which I might have showed one. I did show one on my channel. It was a diseased one that I threw a bit of pipe at and it died on the spot over at my place. And it's sort of almost skin and bones, and all pus pouring out of its eyes and everything. That's myxomatosis. You see it on occasion around here. And a lot of times the kids are like, oh, look, Dad, there's a rabbit. I've caught a rabbit because it wasn't moving very fast. And can I keep it as a pet? And the reason your 6-year-old caught that rabbit was because it's got myxomatosis and can barely see where it's going. And some of them, I've had ones that I've stood literally 2 foot away from and they're not even conscious that you're there, and they're just bang, kill them like that because they're dying. It was a deliberately released disease by the government, and it's one of the diseases that they've never actually got full resistance to. But anyway, they said there was a lot of rabbits in this area, and it was a sort of a bit of a changeover in the landscape from where they went to Mulga Bush area to Sandhill area. And on the edge of all that, there seemed to be a lot of rabbits there. And then myxomatosis come and knocked a lot of them out, but then they all started coming back again over the previous, 3, 4, 5 years. And the long and short of it is that your cat can't catch myxomatosis, because I deliberately looked that up after I found that one over there. And I've seen ones, just around the area. Sometimes you're driving along with your car and there'll be one standing on the road like a dum-dum, and, that's because it's got it as well. And, you know, you get to see it. I used to see it as a kid in Western Australia. But anyway, back to the story. They had a heap of rabbits. Then they'd been thinned out by myxomatosis, but then they'd sort of come back probably about half as many as there originally was. And so they had to cross one part for a while that was to get from one area to another. And it was basically a 2-day walk. But what they'd done was they decided to eat a lot of rabbit and then just concentrate on walking for 2 days. And this is one of the things they can do. They can not eat for a couple of days and it's not a problem, but they'll absolutely gorge themselves with food initially and then rest and then boom, just get to walking, you know, and just go for it. My sister was saying they've done blood sugar tests where they've eaten nothing for 3 days and then they have a kilo of kangaroo meat. And during the time, the blood sugar is just like straight line, just exactly the same the whole time. Over the 3 days they don't eat. They eat a kilo of blooming kangaroo and the blood sugar is still just a straight line. They've got amazing ability to not eat for a period of time yet. And it was due to being hunter-gatherer and having bad seasons and stuff like that. They're very stabilised when it comes to that sort of stuff, but then you add sugar into their diet and, you know, they become diabetics very easily and they don't really go well at all with sugar. But this is the standardised plan. This area takes 2 days to walk through. We gorge ourselves full of food and we go to sleep in mid-afternoon and then we get up early and then, boom, you know, we have everything packed the day before and then get up early, right everyone up, start walking as soon as the sun starts to come up. And they go for 2 days straight and more or less don't eat for those 2 days, you know. Of course they drink water, but, you know, you can drink water and keep walking, you know, you don't, not stopping all the damn time. And, you know, and this is the thing, that's one of the ones they've done. And anyway, he went down there with his daughter and they started using a digging stick, which is just a long, fairly sturdy stick, almost looks a bit like a walking stick. And what he done, I never realised exactly how they do it. And I knew digging sticks because I've heard about them a million times, and I've never really taken notice of how they use them. What it is, you get the stick in your right hand and you sort of slam it into the ground, and it's really like as though you're breaking up the soil with the digging stick, and then with your left hand you just throw back loose sand. But they were going fairly well because this was sand with rabbit holes in it. Now, I've known this for many years, and it's even happened at the front of my house here. You're walking along and ground gives way underneath you, and it's frickin' rabbit holes. And that's an area there where it's an old rabbit hole, and where we pulled some of those trees out, that area sort of wasn't accessible, and there was a bit of collapsed small tree and then a blooming mattress on the ground, old mattress springs that were tied in with all that have been there probably since the bloody World War II or something. And so I sort of didn't go into that area, but I got some of that stuff out, and then I got the mattress springs out, and then we pulled a few other trees out, and, you know, then I cut up some of those other trees that we pulled out before we pulled them out because they were a little bit too big. So I chopped all the branches off just to make it basically a trunk that's standing about 6 foot tall. And, you know, cut the rest up. Well, anyway, I troop out there out to me firewood heaps, and, you know, that rabbit hole eventually just kept caving in every time I walked on it. And it used to happen as a kid too. You'd be walking along and you know, you'd be near where there's rubber barrels, down you'd go, and they sort of collapse in. So they were digging out these rabbit burrows fairly easily because it was in sand, but they'd slam the stick into the ground in front with their right hand and then just keep whooshing all the sand back. And they're basically following the damn burrow, and just, you know, she was at one end and he was at the other. And yeah, they'd keep going every now and then. Bang, he'd put his hand in, pull the rabbit out. He's squealing, and then he'd sort of put the digging stick down, and he'd have the legs in the left hand, or maybe even in the right hand when he knew it was time to grab it. And then he'd grab hold of the back of the head, and they'd pull, and it breaks the neck. bang, throw him to one side. Wow. Just him and his daughter, who was probably about, I don't know, 17 or something like that. They went through and they, just this one little area, they ripped out a whole bunch of the blooming things. And it's sort of funny when he comes out with the first one, I don't think the daughter had really had any experience with digging out rabbits before, and he was trying to teach her. And he pulled out the first rabbit, which is a fairly large one, and it starts squealing, and you see the daughter like, whoa! The daughter like shits herself. You know, thought, oh, I've got to pull this thing out, and we're going to have a bit of a scuffle, knock it on the head, and that's it. Pulls it out, starts squealing, and the daughter's like, oh, freaks out. She's sitting about 3 yards away or 4 yards away, or something like that, probably about 4 yards away. Maybe even a little further, and you just see her shit herself when this thing squeals. But for too long, she was pulled one out as well. Like, he was getting quite a few, and then she eventually, you know, I don't think she was digging quite as quick as he could, you know, not as much muscles in the arms, just, you know, and first time at doing it. And anyway, she got one and pulled it out and broke its neck, and holy smoke, the one she pulled out, bloody hell, it was a big rabbit. It's one of the biggest rabbits I've seen in a long time. And yeah. Well, you think, what do? Do they butcher them? Well, no, they actually don't. And they go back with all these rabbits, and he got some smaller ones out there too, and he's trying to bundle up all the ears and hold them all together, and then he hands it to his daughter, who grabs below his hand, and then she's walking off with, you know, about 6 rabbits in one hand, just holding them by the ears. And they all walk back to where, you know, everyone's got the camels tied to the trees and the tent set up, and yeah. They don't butcher them, they throw them on the fire whole, and it allows all the juices to stay inside, and they basically, then they're pulling them all out, one by one, out of the fire, and they're just like these black charcoal looking things, and then they open them up and get into eating them. They've got a lot of dogs hanging around, they throw food to the dogs, and parents have told me it's quite common they have a large amount of dogs in the outback, and they love their dogs, and if you come in, there'll be dogs going everywhere, and some people shit themselves and they don't know whether to get out of the car if the dogs are going to bite them on the ankle or not. But they say, parents said, if you run over one of the dogs, that's it, you're in real trouble. And there's just dogs everywhere. But, you know, he had these dogs here, and like, you know, the boss had all these dogs. And some of them are bloody near skin and bone and half-starved looking things, and he's throwing bits of meat here and there to some of the dogs. And everybody had a good feed of rabbit and went to sleep at probably about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And getting ready for the next day. But yeah, they also had one of the women on the settlements there. They said she had more dogs than, you know, they generally would see. This woman, one Aboriginal woman, she owned 40 dogs on her own. They love dogs. Don't know why, they just do. And that's another one of their cultural things, is they love their dogs, and they've got a lot of them. But yeah, anyway, that's just a little waffle on some of the things. I tell you what, she was no worries with the guns back in those days. Some of the film footage I had there, like, I mean, every Tom, Dick and his mates carrying a gun of some sort, you know, not heaps of them, but, you know, there's a woman carrying a flaming gun, and then the kid's trying to pull the gun off her. And you see her close the bolt or something on the gun. Well, she done something, I don't know, might have turned the safety on or something. And then let the bloomin' kid, looked like he's about 5 years old, let the kid have the bloomin' gun. But the kid's trying to pull the butt of the gun to take the gun off the mother or the auntie or whoever it was. I was thinking, God, blimey. And you see a flick, clunk, and then, okay, then there you go. So the kid's walking along with this bloomin' centerfire rifle, and you think, oh, blimey. Yeah, there's a woman puttering around with guns, and some of the men, you know, this is a different time. And really, even still today in the Northern Territory, and this is, you know, oh, gun-free Australia, they've banned guns in Australia. I don't know if it's still the case now, but it probably is. You know, you can get a gun within 3 days in the Northern Territory. 3 days. One of the few places where they haven't made it hard to get crossbows either. But, you know, it is the outback and things are wild and you know, Aboriginals still out there now still have a lot of guns and we don't spear kangaroo, we just drive along with a frickin' car and hitting everything known to man, blooming tree branches and jumping over stumps and everything, and then the blooming, you know, barrel out the window, bingo, got him. And they go over to see what it's like, and the first thing they do is lift it up and drop it on the bonnet to check out how good it is. That's sort of funny. They will literally drive cars through the bush, and there was one my uncle knew out in the South Australian desert, and he said, oh, he had a real simple way of talking. And I said to him, flaming hell, mate, why are you walking everywhere? Why don't you get a car? Oh, we did have a car. One day I was chasing a kangaroo, and the wheel hit a tree stump or wheel hit a rock, and the wheel broke off, and well, now we're walking, you see. They probably smashed in all the bloody wishbone suspension on the thing when they hit a stump, or the blooming wheel bearing just broke and separated, you know. And they're friggin', oh shit, what do we do? Well, not much we can do. Oh well, now we're walking, you see. Just left the friggin' car there, gave up on it. Shit, oh well, now we're gonna walk. And they've been walking for like months since, you know, 6 months or more. But that's just, you know, the way it is. So, and they, you know, they got a lot of really hack fix-ups, and they got a lot of really, really shit cars. You know, the sort of cars that some of the things I've seen. Oh man, you know, you wouldn't think you'd see cars like that outside of Africa, but don't worry, you go to the outback and, oh, I'm going to work, and then some of them are just fucking atrocious, you know. They have a fucking little drum, you know, no front seat or whatever, it doesn't matter, they just stick a drum in there. You know, don't accelerate too much because you're just about going on your back, but, you know, one of them I even seen, they had a fucking pram as one of the seats of the car. Oh shit, you couldn't make this stuff up. But you know, that's like a fucking, it was like a pusher, like a vinyl pusher. Dirty vinyl pusher. That's pretty much what it was. Not an actual pram, but you know, the little ones where the kid sits up, and that's what they had as a seat in the frickin' car. And I'm thinking, shit. You know, it's they get them running. I mean, it's just a mess. But anyway, it is what it is, and I think a lot of the time that, you know, the cops sort of, you know, they don't like it, but they go a little bit easy-handed on them, and you know, a lot of these things are not even driving on public roads anyway. They're just driving on dirt tracks inside the reservation, and nobody freaking cares, you know. And it is what it is. I mean, if you're worried about the turn signals not working, then don't worry about that. That's the least of your problems. We're not going to use them in a million years. So you know, that's, you're thinking, you know, you're talking about a car that's got a bit of a log and a friggin' pram as the seats in the car. But anyway, that's just some of the things that is, yeah, I've been watching.